On Friday afternoon, it's coming out of Israel, and it's significant. I just want to recap it for you, with the Netanyahu cabinet approving the occupation of Gaza City. There's been a lot of speculation that Benjamin Netanyahu would expand the military presence in Gaza. That's happening. We've had confirmation of that today. I'll read it to you. It's a statement from the Netanyahu office outlining the plans to occupy Gaza City with 5 principles for ending the war. And the statement says the IDF will prepare to take control of Gaza City while providing humanitarian aid to civilian population outside the combat zones. And these are the principles for ending the war. 1, disarmament of Hamas. 2, return of all hostages, living and dead. 3, demilitarisation of the Gaza Strip. This is really important, this 4th one, Israeli security control over the Gaza Strip. 5, the existence of an alternative civilian government that is not Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. And just incidentally, an absolute majority of cabinet ministers believed that the alternative plan that had been presented to cabinet would not achieve the defeat of Hamas or the return of the abductees. My colleague Tom Connell is with me. Tom, this is a huge development a couple of years on after October 7, and another significant development in this Middle East crisis.
Yeah, it's very significant. If you think about the global pressure that's been coming on Israel, a lot of that's to do with the aid. A lot of the domestic pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu is the fact that he's so far failed in one of his key objectives, to destroy Hamas. Hamas still exists, Hamas still governs. Yes, obviously greatly reduced, but this was always the question. If Hamas was not destroyed, then no one else is there to take over control of Gaza. There won't be an alternative while Hamas is there. That's become quite clear. So this appears to be his pivot, doesn't it? That he's going from waiting for Hamas to be destroyed, walk away, whatever it might be, and then something to fill the void. That's not happening, so he takes control. Interesting as to what this will mean specifically. So there's Gaza City, and then there's the entire Gaza Strip. So the entire Gaza Strip is about 41 kilometres. Gaza City is part of the area Israel has not controlled so far. So about 25% of Gaza overall, Israel has not controlled. So there has been some concern about this plan, because that's believed where the hostages are, that if you go in and control that, will the hostages be killed as a result, either in fighting or by Hamas? So that has been part of the reluctance. People might say, why not do this a long time ago if this was always where you end up at? That was always part of the potential issue. So it appears to be this is his pivot, that it's kind of a recognition that destroying Hamas has not happened yet, and there's no body or entity emerging, and now he's sort of putting it on, isn't he, Arab nations in some way to help some other form of government in Hamas to emerge. So, look, a long way from any end of this conflict as a result, and this is him ramping up. And as I said, addressing, yes, there's a lot of global pressure on Israel to better facilitate aid, given this horrendous situation, humanitarian situation for the civilians in Gaza, but there has also been pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu because his fundamental objectives, which always went around hostages and destroying Hamas, so this couldn't happen again, October 7 couldn't happen again, that hasn't been achieved so far, and that, yes, Hamas has been greatly reduced in terms of its numbers, many killed, but many more have joined as well, and it's still operating, if you like. So.
You know, Tom, an interesting element of that statement as well says not Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. So an alternative civilian government that is not Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. The reason I point that out is because as part of that broader momentum that you spoke about and the pressure that has been increasing internationally upon the Netanyahu government, there have been various international talks. The Prime Minister met with, on the phone, spoke to Macron. He also spoke to Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, this week. So clearly the Prime Minister still believes that the Palestinian Authority is a viable alternative, a viable set of leadership. The Israeli government today, through that statement from Netanyahu's office, disagrees with that. They don't want to see any civilian government either led by Hamas or the Palestinian Authority that is led by Mahmoud Abbas, the individual that our Prime Minister spoke to 48 hours ago.
It appears to put the resolution of this at a higher bar. Now, the Palestinian Authority was the authority with which Israel used to go down that path of trying to achieve a two-state solution. It used to be in charge as well in Gaza before Hamas took control. And you're right to point that out, Canada specifically mentioned there had to be a pledge from the Palestinian Authority to hold elections in Gaza. Now, they have no means of doing that right now, we should point out. They're not in control, but they specifically mentioned that, the Palestinian Authority. So to have them not be allowed to have that role, this is, I suppose, trying to force the onus on other Arab nations to get an alternative in place. It does make it a little bit harder, though, doesn't it, if they're being excluded as well.
And the other thing that you touched on earlier that I'm interested in getting the reaction out of Israel is the view from the families of hostages. We've heard from many of them over recent months who have said that they want the war to end. They think that the best way to get out their loved ones is for the conflict to end. At least certainly that's the view of some of the families, that the spokespeople on behalf of those families. Now, what does this mean for those that remain there, the couple of dozen that remain that we believe are alive? There are many that are dead, but there are around 20 believed to be still alive, Tom.
Exactly, and how can that happen? And if it's seen by Hamas as this last existential push against them, then that would be the concern, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Will they keep the hostages alive? The other element of this, Israeli media is talking about the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu talks about seizing Gaza City, evacuating residents. Well, that's easier said than done, as we've seen. But establishing more civilian infrastructure, hospitals, camps for evacuees and more distribution of humanitarian aid. So it will be pitched by the Israeli government as, I suppose, if their argument would be, if they're in charge of it, there won't be excuses anymore about distributing that aid. The issue partly about distribution is, well, we've still got Hamas in charge in some of these areas. That's why we're concerned about distributing aid. If they're not, if they're taking control of the rest of it, and I'm just putting the arguments being put across in Israeli media, obviously based on government reports, but do they lose, the excuse of we can't give the aid? If you control everywhere, you've got to be able to give the aid out.
And the other, another element to this, Tom, in terms of, you spoke about how small this enclave is, Gaza. It's a tiny strip of land, and Gaza City, it's not like some massive city like we would think in United States or Europe or something. It is obviously, it's been besieged, it's been diminished over recent months, and then on top of that, you've got the suggestion in the statement from the Prime Minister's office that they will provide civilian support outside of the combat zones. Combat zones, that's been the problem with this, the difficulty with this war throughout the whole, last couple of years, because Hamas, it basically enmeshes itself within the civilian population. And the idea that you have sort of clear-cut combat zones versus civilian areas, it just doesn't happen in such a tight, urban, impoverished strip like the Gaza Strip. There's not a clear delineation. No. And that's fundamentally been one of the difficulties when you've got the terrorists right in the middle and deliberately hiding themselves within the civilian population.
Modern warfare has increasingly involved civilians, and it's been more confused anyway. Add the fact that it's this tiny amount of land, and it's a deliberate strategy from Hamas, as you say, to enmesh themselves. And look, there's been, and you can still have a debate around what target should be bombed. I suppose you can both certainly criticise Hamas for basing itself under a hospital or a school, and then there's a separate debate on to what extent that site might be targeted. And the issue for media in that regard has been that there's no media access, and every time a strike is conducted, media is told by the IDF this was a strike on Hamas. And there's just no visibility on that, is there? But yes, that's the problem. The conflict zones, it's all a conflict zone. And the reports and the vision coming in, well, it wasn't vision, I should say, reports. The media were not allowed to take vision in. When they ramped up these humanitarian flights a week or so ago, when that pressure got really strong on Israel, nobody was allowed to film from the air, but the eyewitness reports from media on there was that you knew the second you hit Gaza because it went from buildings to rubble. There's, for a lot of these places, there's scarcely anything left. So we're seeing some aerials here which have been relatively rare in terms of, most of the vision we see is on the ground, which looks obviously decimated, but there's not much untouched. And part of that is obviously because Hamas based itself all around the place and then they get targeted and things are destroyed. So I'm not saying that there's not multiple complicated reasons for that, but yeah, there's, it's mainly tents and destroyed concrete is what the Strip is right now. So that's, even if this happens and you manage the military side of things, that rebuild, they mention it in these reports, civilian infrastructure, hospital, schools, great. God, how long is that going to take and how difficult is that going to be if the guns do finally fall silent?
We haven't heard from the Israeli Prime Minister after his cabinet approved this move. As soon as we do, we'll bring it to you as it happens from Israel. But we did hear from Benjamin Netanyahu earlier in the piece a few hours ago.
Will Israel take control of all of Gaza?
We intend to, in order to assure our security, remove Hamas there, enable the population to be free of Gaza, and to pass it to civilian governance. That is not Hamas and not anyone advocating the destruction of Israel. That's what we want to do. We want to liberate ourselves and liberate the people of Gaza from the awful terror of Hamas. We don't want to keep it. We want to have a security perimeter. We don't want to govern it. We don't want to be there as a governing body. We want to hand it over to Arab forces